Welcome back again to another GWT tutorial, and in this tutorial we'll continue exploring how to build a GUI in Google Web Toolkit. Even though we covered that last time, in this particular tutorial we are going to explore how we can use proper architecture to build GUI in Google Web Toolkit. And like last time, I've prepared a little presentation to illustrate some of the concepts involved. So let me just open it for a moment and start the slideshow. So as I mentioned just now, this tutorial is about proper architecture for GWT GUI building. So what have we done in tutorial 1.0? Well, I've explained some of the fundamental concepts of GWT. I've created a basic GWT project and I've built a sample GUI. And this sample GUI was very simple, even though the GUI we are going to do in this tutorial is roughly equally simple. The only difference is we're going to implement architecture. So yeah, again, what are we going to do today? Well, we are going to build a GUI using proper architecture, and I think this is the last time I'm going to say that. So why should we use proper architecture? Well, if you use proper architecture, your code is more organized, it's easier to maintain, and easier to extend, meaning if you want to add functionality to your application, having a proper architecture there would make the job so much easier. So proper architecture is worth the learning curve and the trouble. So what architecture am I going to use? Well, let's first take a look at how traditional web applications work. Well, traditional web applications, they have a web page, and this web page basically opens another web page or jumps to another web page, which in turn jumps to another web page, which could possibly jump back to the previous page. So you're constantly going from page to page to page to page, which means that your application is also built up on a page-to-page basis. But that's not how Ajax-based or Web 2.0 applications work. So how does it work in GWT? Well, let me show you. GWT-based applications can be broken down into sections, or sections of a page that are being refreshed and changed. So these sections are in GWT referred to as widgets, which is something I introduced briefly in my previous tutorial. And they sort of program the same way as Java Swing, using Java Swing JFrames and panels. In a Swing application, you start with a big JFrame, and then you split up your GUI into JPanels, each with their controls. So this roughly works the same, actually. So if you have experience with Java Swing, GWT shouldn't be much of an issue. So the concept that I'm going to introduce in this case is I'm going to separate my program into what you can see on top, main view, which is basically an overlapping page, and this main view can either open page 1 or page 2, or even open a menu, or both, depending on the situation. And essentially page 1 can open up page 1.1 and page 1.2, while page 2 can open page 2.1 to page 2.3, which would essentially make page 1 and page 2 a main view as well. So essentially you end up having a very big hierarchy of an application, in which your GUI is basically created top down, like from the top of the pyramid all the way to the bottom. So in this tutorial I'm going to focus on purely the top part. I'm going to implement a main view. This is my basic GUI placeholder. I will illustrate that a bit more in a moment, which will open page 1 and page 2 based on buttons in a menu. I'm not going to further refine the hierarchy in page 1.1 and 1.2, mostly to keep this tutorial a bit simple. What I would like all of you as the viewers to understand that basically an application can be broken down all the way top down and further refined along the way. So before actually going into code, there's one thing I would like you all to remember. is that a main view does not contain GUI of itself, but they do regulate GUI. Meaning a main view is basically an empty placeholder that opens other GUI components based on user input. If this picture is a little bit confusing, maybe my next and last slide will clarify it a little bit. So the screen that I'm going to build is roughly going to look like this. Well, first I'll show the situation as we've implemented it in a previous tutorial. So we had project 1, which contained a composite widget that we created called page 1, and which contained the page 1 controls, like the Dilbert comic that you saw, which in turn opened up another composite widget called page 2, which had its own controls, and if I remember correctly, it was a flex table. So what is the situation we are going to do right now? Well, in this tutorial, we're going to create a project called project 2. And project 2 is going to have a main view, which is going to contain a composite widget called menu, which implements menu controls. And it's going to contain a content panel. And the content panel is actually nothing more than an empty placeholder. Why? Because, as I mentioned just now, the main view itself does not contain any GUI controls. Whatever GUI you see is going to be implemented in other composite widgets, like for example the menu, or whatever widget I want to place inside my content panel. So in this case, page 1 and page 2, based on the buttons in the menu, will be loaded inside the content panel. And it's the main view's job to basically ensure that whatever button is pressed on the menu will result in the correct page being opened. Alright, so enough talking and more demoing. So let's start up my Eclipse. I can close this in the meanwhile. So let's wait for Eclipse to load. And wait for my workspace to build. Okay, you may be wondering where the GWT project 2 came from. Well, GWT project 2 is actually the project I've created for this tutorial. However, I didn't want to go through the whole process of creating a project and cleaning out all the example code to get to the starting situation, because I've demoed that in my previous tutorial. So I don't really want to waste time on it. So in this case I have an empty on module load, which is the starting point of my application. And on module load basically needs to have some GUI. So as I've shown in my PowerPoint presentation just now, the first thing I'm going to do is create a main view class, which is going to basically regulate the whole application in this case. Let's call this main view. And main view needs to inherit from composite, because it is going to be a GUI component. Then finish. So what am I going to do in the main view? Well, in this case, as you have seen in the presentation just now, I'm going to have a menu at the top, and I'm going to have a content panel at the bottom. So obviously I'm going to use a vertical panel, because a vertical panel helps me stack my GUI vertically. Then I'm going to create a constructor to kickstart the whole thing, which is going to have a init widget. I forgot to handle my import just now. Let's import the vertical panel, and the init widget is going to be this dot. Let's wait for my auto completion to load. vPanel. Then basically I need to have the menu in my vertical panel, but the menu I've not created yet. The widget that is going to contain the menu. So the only thing I can do for now is create the content panel, which I'm also going to make a vertical panel. And I guess I will just initialize this one inside the constructor by this.content panel equals new vertical panel. And I'm going to place this content panel inside my V panel. There you go. And that's all I can do right now, because the main view doesn't contain any GUI of itself. It needs to rely on other widgets to basically show its GUI. So let's first create a menu. So I'm going to create a class and I'm going to call it menu view, which in terms inherits from composite. And the menu view is going to contain a horizontal panel. Because I want my menu buttons to be horizontally stacked. Then, well, naturally I need to do an init widget for the horizontal panel. And then I'm simply going to create two buttons. So, button... Well, I'm going to display some landscapes in this exercise, so I'm just going to call it landscape 1 btn. Or landscape 1. Handle my import. Then I'm going to create a second button, and since I'm a lazy programmer, I'm simply going to copy that line. Then I'm going to add those buttons to my horizontal panel. And again, since I'm a lazy programmer, I'm simply going to copy the line again. So, well, right now if I were to display these buttons, nothing would happen. So I gotta create some click handlers as well. So as I mentioned in my previous tutorial, I prefer to create my click handlers in private classes. So this one is going to be landscape. Oh, let's just make it shorter. ls1 click handler implements click handler. Organize my import and implement the unimplemented methods, which basically will be the code that is executed whenever a button is clicked. So that's the first click handler. Then for the second click handler, again, since I'm a lazy programmer, I'm just going to copy the code. Then finally I have to attach these click handlers to my button. So in this case I'm going to say landscape 1 btn dot add click handler is new ls1 click handler. Let me just copy that to avoid typos. Then for the second button, landscape 2 btn dot add click handler is new ls2 click handler, and again I'm going to copy that to avoid typos. So there you go, two buttons in a horizontal panel, each with its own click handler. So by right, if I click this button, this one should respectively open the first landscape page and this one should open the second landscape page. Well, right now obviously I can't implement that code yet because the landscape page should open on the main view and not inside the menu view. So I'm just going to save menu view for now, and go back to my main view. Make the screen a little bit bigger, where I can actually add this menu view to my main view. So for that I'm going to say this.vPanel.add menu. Alright, then let's just hold on here for a while and let me demonstrate what we have built so far. But before I can do that, I actually need to attach my main view to my root panel. So I'm going to create an instance of my main view inside the GWT Project 2 class. And then attach this main view to my root panel using rootpanel.get.add main view. Alright, so now let's try and run this thing. And see what happens. It's too bad that whenever I'm recording my computer is lagging quite a fair bit. Anyway, there's the URL, so let me just open my Google Chrome. And wait for it to come up. Okay, application still loading. Okay, the plugin just crashed, but that's the button, so let me just try and run this again. Okay, now it didn't crash. So I have landscape 1, landscape 2 inside my horizontal panel, which is inside the main view. So just to make it a little bit more clear, I'm not sure why that thing just crashed just now, but no, it's probably nothing much. So just to make it a little bit more clear how my GUI is constructed, I'm going to set the let's see, what was the code again? This.vPanel.set border width to 1, so you will see a nice border around the vertical panel. So let's just run this thing again. So as you can actually see, the only border part you see is around the menu. Okay, so I'm gonna stop it for now. So now basically we need to have some content pages. So, and since I mentioned I want to display some landscapes in these pictures, let me just get my landscape pictures. So cut them and then store them inside the GWT Project 2 folder. If you want to add resources to your project, you actually need to add them to the war folder, like with any normal G2E project. And in this case I'm going to save them in a folder called images. So there you are, and what these pictures are you will see later. So my Eclipse should have automatically detected them by now. Yes, there they are. So let's create another composite widget. So I'm gonna call this one, well, page 1 is a bit inspirationless, so let's just call it landscape 1. And again, inheriting from composite. So in this case I need another placeholder, I guess. Yeah, let's just use a vertical panel again. import it again. And create my constructor. And do an init widget. Okay, then what am I going to contain inside this composite widget is I'm going to display image. So I'm going to create an image widget called landscape1 equals new image. Then organize my image path. Then set the path of the actual image. So that is going to be, well, judging from the war folder onwards, it's going to be /images/ landscape1.jpg. And since I know that this image is rather big, I'm going to set the size for this image as well, or set the width actually, to, well, let's say 600 pixels. Image width is indicated as a string or as a percentage, so this would actually be 100% of my screen size. Either way, be it in pixels or as a percentage, the input parameter is a string, as you can see. So right now I'm simply going to set it to 600 pixels. Then add this picture to my vPanel. Okay, so that's landscape 1. Then let me create landscape 2. And again, it's going to be another composite. Okay, since I'm a lazy programmer and this page is roughly going to be the same, I'm just going to copy this code. Just change the name of the constructor. So again, I have my vertical panel, which is going to contain my content. I'm going to do a init widget for the vPanel. I create an image. Well, let's just call this one landscape 2, which is going to point to landscape 2 picture. And I just noticed that I didn't use a capital in that. So let me correct that. Landscape 2 set width is also 600. And I'm going to add it to my vPanel as well. So right now I got 2 pages that need to be added to my main view. So for now, let me just close these 2. And I'll close this one as well. And enlarge the code a little bit. So naturally, I could add these pages here, but inside my constructor, but I don't want to load these pages on startup. I want to load them when a button is pressed. So in that case, I'm going to create a method to open each individual page. So it's going to be a public method, void, which I'm going to call open landscape 1. No input parameters. And my class name is called landscape 1. So let's create an instance. And call it page 1 in this case. Is new landscape 1. Well, this landscape 1 needs to be added to my content panel. So I'm going to say this.content panel, which is the placeholder for all content in my main view. Add, and then page 1. However, when I'm going to open page 1, landscape 1, I am not sure whether or not landscape 2 is already visible. So for that reason, I don't want to open 2 pages at the same time. Before I even create landscape 1 or page 1, I'm going to say this.contentPanel.clear, which completely empties whatever is in the content panel, be it a page or be it no page. So I'm going to do the same thing for landscape 2. So open landscape 2. And then clear my content panel first. So all the content is gone. Then create the actual class, in this case page 2, of the type new landscape 2. And finally add this to the content panel. Alright, and which landscape do I want to see first? Well, maybe I don't want to see a landscape at all actually. So my initial content in my content panel is going to be a very simple label. Let's just call this one text label. Press a button to see a nice landscape. And I'm going to add this, well, after I handle the import, I'm going to add this text label to the content panel. And since this is on startup inside the constructor, the content panel is empty, so I don't need to do a clear first. Okay, so let's just run what we have so far. Okay, what I did just now may not have been the best idea. I think I switched my app up already, so yeah, it's fine. Okay, paste and go. Alright, so I have landscape 1, landscape 2, and press a button to see a nice landscape. However, these buttons don't do anything yet. So, how I can ensure that these buttons can open a landscape, well, that I'm going to show right now. So, let's for a moment go back to my PowerPoint presentation. Okay, and then I'm just going to open the actual slide. So what I have so far is I have my main view, I have my page 1, I have my page 2, and I have a menu. So when a button on the menu is pressed, the menu should talk to the main view, which is his superior in this case, to prompt him to open page 1 and page 2 respectively. So how can a widget communicate to his superior, or the employee talk to his superior so he can talk to his peer? Well, I need to set up a communication line for that. So let me show you how you can do that. To enable communication between the main view and the menu, I need to ensure that the menu has a copy of the main view to communicate with, or in Java terminology, a instance of the main view or reference to the main view to communicate with. So for that I'm going to add a parameter to my constructor of the type main view, and I'm going to call it main. And I'm going to store this instance of main view, or actually a reference to the instance of main view, as a global variable. And I'm going to store it using this.main, pointing to the global variable, equals main. So since he now contains a copy of main view, he can freely communicate with main view. So in the click handler, I can say, main, can you please open landscape 1 for me, which is the method we just defined over here, which actually opens our page. Or main, can you open landscape 2 for me, which is actually the other method here. And that's all there is to it. Now the menu view can communicate with the main view. There goes my Luke File Walker virus scanner. Let's just stop this one. Not sure why it gets triggered right now. Never mind, I'll just continue because I don't want to redo this whole story. But as you can see, or you may have noticed just now already, I now have an error inside my main view. Why? Because the constructor of menu view now requires a parameter of the type main view. So main view essentially needs to give a copy of himself along to menu view. So how can I do that? Well, very simple. I simply say this. So this means I'm going to provide a copy or reference to the instance of this class to this menu view. And that's really all there is to it. So let's now run the application again. Alright, so let me now press landscape 1 and hope that everything went well. I made no mistake. So as you can see, this is the first landscape picture, or the landscape 1 class, which is now loading in the content panel here. And if I press landscape 2, it should actually show the second image. So now I can freely switch, at least if the plugin doesn't crash. Don't know why that happens sometimes, especially when I'm recording. So landscape 1 and landscape 2, landscape 1, landscape 2. I can freely switch in between, and only the content panel changes. So let me now, just for the fun of it, show you what will happen if I don't clear my content panel placeholder. Well, landscape 1, then landscape 2 gets added to it, landscape 1 gets added to it again, and I can even add landscape 1 again to it. So this will indefinitely continue, because every time I create a new instance of the class without destroying the previous instance using the clear panel. So naturally I need this line. Alright, so this is my very basic GUI. As a matter of fact, I've implemented what I have promised. So the main view, the page 1, the page 2 and the menu. And well, I'm not going to implement another layer, but essentially it works the same way. The only difference is that instead of page 1 containing an image, he is going to contain another content panel placeholder and open other widgets as and when he sees fit. Alright, so before I end this tutorial, I want to show one more thing. And that will hopefully make clear how powerful this architecture is. What if I not only want landscape 1 and landscape 2 to open a respective new page? What if I want the landscape 1 page to open landscape 2 and vice versa? Well, I can very easily do that by simply extending my architecture. So I'm going to open landscape 1 and landscape 2. So for this to work, landscape 1 and landscape 2 will have to communicate with the main view as well. So how do I do that? Well, same way as with the menu. I simply extend their constructors by containing another parameter called main view. And I'm going to store this one globally. And make sure it's stored in a global variable by saying this.main equals main. Okay, same thing for landscape 1. Private main view main is going to be, well, receive the parameter main view main, and then say this.main equals main. Then once again, I'm going to avoid the error inside my main view by simply providing landscape 1 and landscape 2 with the parameter it needs by using this. Then I need some sort of button on both my landscape 1 and my landscape 2 to basically trigger the other page. Well, since buttons are a bit inspirationless, I already made 2 today. I'm going to demonstrate this with an anchor, which is sort of a hyperlink. So that's my anchor, and this anchor is going to be, well, since this is landscape 1, it's going to be called go to landscape 2. Well, naturally I need a click handler for this, but since I don't want to drag this tutorial on too long, it's been long enough already, I'm simply going to add the click handler directly, even though I find this way of coding it a little bit, and this way of coding a little bit more messy. Anyway, you've seen a proper way I like to do it just now already. So here you go, implement my method. And then I'm simply going to say main, can you open landscape 2 for me? So again, I'm simply using the public method that was defined inside the main. So why am I having an error here? Oh, that's because I'm invoking it inside a class. Okay, this can be very easily fixed. What I'm simply going to do is create a private method, open landscape 2. Open it in there. Then invoke this method inside my click handler. And then I will not have that error anymore. So again, I'm just making use of the public method that I defined in the main view. So the same command that the menu gave to the main view to open landscape 1 or landscape 2 will now be used in this case by landscape 1 to open landscape 2. So same thing in landscape 2. I'm going to create another anchor. Open landscape 1. And anchor 2 is going to have a click handler as well, very much in the same manner. Add the unimplemented methods. Then again, I'm going to have a private method. So it should be open landscape 1. Then main dot open landscape 1. After which I simply invoke this method over here. And that should be all. So now I've extended my architecture to basically leverage on what I've already established to open, to have a page open the other page. So let me run the project one more time. At least hoping that in my hurry that I made no mistake just now. Okay, so let's open landscape 1. Ah, I made a mistake just now. What I forgot to do is I have to add my anchor to my vPanel. Else it won't display. And same thing over here. There you go. Oops, wrong button. And let's just reload this again. So landscape 1 now has an anchor. Let's go to landscape 2. Okay, so this is landscape 2. Let's go back to landscape 1. And I can keep on going back and forth as long as I like with whatever button or anchor I'm using. Alright, then that's it for today. See you at the next tutorial.